Hello everyone, and welcome to a final girl video of tips and tricks to try to help you get better at the game. Um, so this isn't going to be like a fully scripted thing. I have like a sheet of paper over here where I wrote down the different tips that I kind of want to talk about. And I'm not going to be playing an actual game in this video. What I have set up here is a little um, sort of custom. I have a real setup of the skinny dipping setup, but the items I've intentionally chosen to kind of demonstrate one of the tips that I'll be talking about later. Um, and I've picked Hans at Camp Happy Trails with Lori just to. Most people who play Final Girl are going to have this feature film. It's the one that most people are going to start with. And Hans is actually, despite being one of the simplest killers, if not the simplest killer, is definitely not a pushover. Hans is a very big stat stick, and his finale usually puts you on a very strict clock, especially if you get the Dark Obsession Dark Power. So I wanted to pick Hans because if you can learn how to beat Hans at Camp Happy Trails fairly consistently, then I think you will be well on your way to beating any other killer location combination. Because there are a lot of killers that are easier than Hans, and there are a lot of locations that are easier than Camp Happy Trails. So, for my first tip is going to be don't overplay your cards. So on the very first turn, you're going to have this hand of 6 cards. You're going to have 2 walks. You're going to have 2 focuses. You're going to have a weak attack and a short rest. And 2 of these cards right off the bat are going to be effectively useless to you. So that'll be short rest, because short rest heals and you'll be at full health at the start of the game, so short rest is effectively useless. Then you have weak attack, which is just going to deal 1 damage to the killer if you're in its space, but there is no setup in the entire game where you will be starting in the killer's space, so weak attack right out the gate is going to be useless as well. Now what people normally do is they will tend to try to walk somewhere on the first turn, and if they get a convert as one of their rolls, like if this was their roll as a double convert, they would discard weak attack and short rest to make it a success. And I believe that this is actually a big mistake. And I'll get into why that is in a second. But so walks and focus are basically your only 2 cards that are actually useful on the very first turn, because focus will help you reduce the horror level and walk will obviously help you move around the board. However, if you are playing these cards on the very first turn willy-nilly without really thinking about why you're playing them, then you are most likely misplaying. You are most likely shooting yourself in the foot from turn 1 and making the rest of the game harder for yourself. So this is the first big tip, which is to just don't overplay if you don't need to. If you can wait to do something next turn in order to save time for this turn to buy more cards to make your next turn even better, then you should just wait for next turn. So you'll see this on my channel all the time. This kind of ties into another tip that I have, which is discard your cards for time. This is a rule in the game, and it's literally labeled as important in the base game rules. Don't forget you can discard your cards for time at any time during the action phase. So you'll see me do this all the time in all of my playthroughs pretty much. On the first turn, I will take short rest and weak attack. I will discard them both for 2 time, and then sometimes I'll take a focus and discard it to gain a 3rd time, and that's it. I will not play walk. I will not play a focus. I will just discard 3 cards and then immediately end my turn. And the reason I do this is because let's look at what happens when I play the game normally, where I just kind of play cards without thinking super hard about what my game plan is. So let's say I'm playing as Lori. I really want to get my ultimate online because it'll give me extra damage. So I want to try to save some victims. So let's say I want to go up here in this direction toward these victims up here just to try to save them, right? So we'll start by just playing a walk. So we'll just roll the dice here, and we get a success. So we'll lose 1 time, we'll walk over into the lake, and then let's say, well, I still want to get over there, right? So we'll just play the other one. So we'll roll the dice, and we get a success and a convert. And you know what? I really want to move over there, so let's go ahead and discard short rest and weak attack to make this a double success, right? So now I'll get to move 2 spaces for the cost of 1 time. Cool. So I'll move 1, and then I'll move a second space up here. So now next turn, if I can just move 1 more space, I will save these 2 victims. And I'm left with 2 focuses in my hand. I could try to play one, but if I don't roll a success, I won't have enough cards to discard to make it a success. So I'll just hold this focus in my hand, right? So now I have 4 time to spend for my next turn. I obviously want to sprint, so I'll spend 2 time for a sprint, and then I will. I have 2 time left, so let's just grab another sprint, right? So that way I can like move and try to save some of these victims. And this might work out for you. So all these would get discarded, this would reset back to 6, something would happen. And then I could play sprint, roll the dice, and I get a miss and convert. Well, now what do? I can discard my 2 focuses, leave the sprint in my hand. So we'll do that. We'll lose 1 time, we'll go like sprint here, save these 2 victims, move here. And then I have 5 time, but I don't really want to risk using the sprint, so I'll pass the turn with 5 time and then like keep playing from there, right? So that's sort of what playing the game normally could look like, right? Where you kind of play your cards on the first turn, discarding cards you don't need, and then just kind of having a little bit of time to spend on other stuff. So let's see what that would look like. So by turn 3, I had saved like 2 victims and was just kind of like over here. So now let's instead discard short rest and weak attack and a focus. And that'll put me at 9 time. Now what I can do is I can spend 2 time on 2 close calls. I can spend 4 time on those 2 sprints, and then I can spend 3 time on a distraction. So now, before I had 2 focuses and 2 sprints in my hand. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 cards in my hand. I have a distraction, a sprint, 2 sprints, 2 close calls, 2 walks, and a focus for turn 2. Now, granted, at the end of the first turn last time, I had moved up all the way up here, right? Whereas now I haven't moved and done that yet, right? But I still have those walks in my hand to use on the next turn. So there was no point in me walking this turn and sabotaging myself by spending all that time and using up all the cards in my hand, when instead I could save the cards in my hand and I can just do that next turn with all this extra stuff, right? And having more cards in your hand in general is a good idea, because now I have more options to discard for these convert rolls, right? So now if I play my turn 2 out, I could start with a sprint and I rolled a success, right? So that would lose 1 time and then it would go 1, 2. And then I could play the other sprint, which got a success and a convert. So I could discard 2 cards to turn this into a double success as well. So I'd lose 1 time. I'll discard focus and a close call, right? So that would be a double success. So now I get to move up to 3 spaces. So now I get to go 1, 2, and then, I don't know, we'll move back here on 3, right? And so now I've saved these 2 victims. And I still have 4 time. And then I could play Distraction, which would have been a miss and a convert. Or I could have played a walk. But the main point is that, and then I would still have 4 time. So like I could save those 2 victims, right? Still have 4 time that I could now use on like 2 guards or Retaliate or Furious Strike, right? So this is just one of the biggest tips that I can give, which is just managing your hand properly. At the end of every planning phase, ideally you want to have between 8 and 10 cards every single turn, because it'll just give you more options for when you have to discard for conversions. It'll give you more cards in your hand total, so that way if you get a lot of bad rolls and don't get a lot of natural successes, you can still have a ton of cards to discard to turn those into successes. So you can still like play the game, right? And also with this strategy, because I discard cards and then have a bunch of extra time at this on the second turn, I can buy 2 close calls at the very beginning of the game, which will also help mitigate some of the bad luck that can happen. Like if it's at the very beginning of the game and I just roll a double miss, I have a close call in my hand that I can use, rather than just kind of playing cards on the first turn and then buying some other cards, having a smaller total hand size, and not having a close call in case something goes wrong. So like, just I don't know how else to express like how important having like just not playing your cards on the very first turn and getting that 9 time to buy a bunch of extra cards for turn 2 and then starting to play the game from there is, it will just set you up for so much success later on in the game than trying to come out the gate swinging by just playing walks and focuses, right? And some people will argue like, well, I want to play focuses early on so that way I can get to this green faster, right? Because if I lower the horror level enough, I can get to this green and I can start rolling 3 dice to potentially get double successes easier, mitigate bad rolls, that sort of thing. And there is a grain of truth to that, right? Like you do want to get into the green of the horror level so that way you can roll 3 dice. That is true. But I want to just point out that Hans, for example, starts the game with the horror level at 4, right? And there are some other killers that even start with the horror level all the way up at 5. And so playing a focus on the first turn, whether you get a single success or a double success, it's only reducing the horror by 1. So it'd bring it down to 3, and then if you played the other focus, again, whether you get a single success or a double doesn't matter, it's reducing the horror by 1. So if you play against most killers that have the horror level at 4 or higher, you're only going to be, you're not even going to get into the green. Like you have to be able to play them again on turn 3 when they come back to your hand, or you have to play a distraction anyway. And so my counterpoint is like, why play these and potentially lose 2 time? Because you lose time when you get a single success on these. Why play these and lose time when instead you could discard one of them at the very start of the game to spend 3 time and get a distraction, and so that way you can reduce the horror level and gain time instead of reducing the horror level and lose time. Or if you just happen to get lucky and you roll a double success, you'll reduce the horror level by 2 instead of just 1, and then you could play a focus to reduce the horror level again, and now you'll be in the green. For the same 2, like playing 2 cards, you get the you get a better result, and all it took was just discarding one of them at the start of the game instead of playing it. So like just recognizing that discarding cards instead of playing them it will make your short term worse. Like obviously your first turn is going to look worse by doing nothing than if you had done something, but your subsequent turns afterward are just going to look substantially better. And if you keep snowballing that momentum every single turn, you can use the extra time you have to buy more cards, because like if you roll a double success on a distraction, you'll gain 2 time for just playing 1 card, and reducing the horror level by 2. And so then you'll get like 3 dice, and then you'll roll more double successes, which you can convert into like more time gain, into more like accumulating more cards, more horror reduction, more movement across the board, more item cards from searching. Like if you can leverage a small advantage at the beginning, it can snowball into a massive advantage by the end of the game. And that's how I'm able to beat a lot of killers, including Hans, before the finale ever even flips, just because I kept snowballing my advantage to the point where I had just done so much. I had saved so many victims, I'd unlocked my ultimate, I'd grabbed a really good weapon. Like, I just was able to do all these things, and it just accumulates into completely overwhelming the killer with advantage just by not playing every card in my hand. So the question is, once you have... So while I can sit here and say like, yeah, you can just discard 3 cards on turn 1, it'll set you up for a better rest of the game. But now I want to give you tips on how do you actually play the rest of the game? Like, how do you identify what will actually win you the game, right? And so that's when I want to talk my next sort of group of tips, which all involve identifying your win condition. So in Final Girl, the highest priority to win the game is to just kill the killer. If you kill the killer, you win the game. You don't have to worry about anything else. So like, yes, you can unlock your Final Girl's ultimate ability, and it can help you achieve the goal of killing the killer, but you do not have to unlock your Final Girl's ultimate in order to kill the killer. This is a nice luxury or bonus to have. It is not a requirement to win the game. Or yes, you can get the horror level all the way down to 0, and it'll help you to take down the killer, but you do not have to have your horror level this low in order to win the game. Yes, going and finding a really good weapon in the item decks can help you kill the killer, but you do not need to find a weapon in order to win the game. And so I want to kind of reiterate, like, yes, all of these mechanics exist in order to help you take down the killer, but at no point is any single one of these things 100% necessary in order to win the game. And so something that's going to be really important in this game is identifying where your win conditions are, and then subsequently identifying an efficient route to take in order to get those win conditions online. So a fantastic example I have set up here that could genuinely be an actual setup for a real game, other than I'm not flipping a starting event. We have the skinny dipping setup card here, right? So with this skinny dipping, I start on top of the dock, Hans is over here, and then all the victims are kind of like on this side of the board, right? And so someone could look at their starting hand, and again, if they're just kind of playing cards without real like thinking about it, they'll do what I did earlier and just kind of like walk up here and then like grab some sprints and just kind of like go from there, right? But if you before you even play a single card, you identify your win conditions, you'll see a very strong way to start attacking Hans immediately right here in this setup. So if you'll notice, I'm at the dock, and in the dock is an axe. So for those of you who don't know, the axe is it is a weapon with 0 text on it. It has no, well, I mean, it has flavor text, but like it has no effect text, right? It is just a weapon at a range of 0 that buffs all of your damage by 2. That's it. It is a 2-handed weapon that buffs all of your damage by 2 at a range of 0. And the axe, genuinely, in my opinion, is one of the strongest items you can get in the game. Outside of like Final Girl's envelope items or some specific location items like the flamethrower is technically better because it does more damage, but it has a limited amount of uses, yada yada. But like the axe, it has unlimited uses and buffs all of your attacks by 2. It's not restricted to not. It will work on all of your reaction cards. So the axe is just so versatile and has unlimited uses, and so, in my opinion, it is one of the strongest weapons in the entire game. And the reason for that is just simple math. So Hans has 12 HP, right? And without a weapon, you start with a weak attack, right? And then you could, throughout the game, purchase a critical blow, a furious strike, and a retaliate. So, in a single turn, if you had purchased all of these cards, not all at once, right? But if you had like bought a critical blow one turn, saved it in your hand, and then on the next turn you had like 8 time, you could grab a retaliate and a furious strike, right? So if at some point on a single turn you have all of these in your hand, you could, in theory, let's just assume maximum possible damage. So you get a double success on all of these. You would get 1 damage from weak attack, 2 damage from furious strike, so that's a total of 3 damage, 3 damage from critical blow, that is 6 damage, and then after you pass your action phase, you could grab a retaliate and then let Hans attack you. That would deal an additional 2 damage, so 6 plus 2, that is a total of 8 damage against the killer. So if you use literally every single possible attack card at your disposal against Hans, you will not even be able to kill him. And then you won't be able to kill him next turn because you have to wait for all of these to come back to go back into the shop during the planning phase. And then on the next turn, then you would get all these back and you could try to actually take off that last 4 HP that he had. So you can take off a significant chunk of his health, like 75% of his health, but you won't be able to kill him, right? So now, if we have the axe that bumps our damage by 2, suddenly all of these attacks are getting an extra 2 damage. So let's do that simple calculation again, but assume that we have the axe. So now weak attack does 3 damage, furious strike does 5 damage, so we're already at 8 damage. With just a weak attack and a furious strike, we have done the exact same amount of damage that we would have done by using all of these cards without the axe. So then critical blow does, oh sorry, this is 3 and 4, so 7 damage, sorry. 1 damage less than everything from before. Critical blow does 5 damage. So 7 plus 5, that is 12 damage. And then if you pass your turn, grab a retaliate, Hans attacks you, this would do another 4 damage. So we can do 16 damage with these cards if you have the axe. And if you'll notice, 16 is exactly double the amount of damage than you could do without the axe. So having a weapon that deals an additional 2 damage, if you've never done the math before, it might not seem like much, but genuinely, these weapons that give you an extra 2 damage are just some of the most powerful weapons in the entire game. Full stop. Like, just dealing... You are overkilling Hans. You have enough damage here. You could deal 12 damage with Weak Attack, Fury Strike, and Critical Blow. You could deal 12 damage with these to kill Hans, and then if he revives, even if he revived with 3 HP, you could still buy and play Retaliate and deal 4 damage. In fact, you could kill him just with a single success, because you would deal 1 damage bumped by 2 from the axe, and that would still be enough to take down Hans. And so getting a weapon like this, even a weapon that just does 1 extra damage, will end up letting you do a total of 12 damage with all of these, which would still be enough to kill Hans in a single turn. And so getting a weapon that gives you 1 or 2 bonus damage should be a very high priority for you. So if I put these back for a second, and then kind of reset our thing here. Put the axe back up here at the dock. So now that we know, like, hey, if I can get my hands on an axe, I can kill Hans, like, in a single turn pretty easily. Now I'm not sitting here at the dock on the first turn and thinking, oh, I want to, like, go over here, save all these victims, and, like, do all this superfluous stuff, right? So now I'm sitting at the dock and I see the axe and I'm thinking, okay, if I can just grab that axe, I can run over here to Hans and just start beating the out of him from turn 1, right? Or turn 2, because I have to buy the stuff to actually be able to do that, right? So from turn 2, I can grab this axe and then immediately go over to Hans. So that'll shape my sort of strategy for the rest of this game. So now I'll discard Short Rest, Weak Attack, and Focus to gain 3 time. I'll spend 2 time on Close Calls, and then I'm already sitting at the dock, so I don't need a sprint immediately necessarily. So I can spend 2 time on a search, and I only need 1 search. I don't need to go overboard. I don't need anything else. I just need that axe, and that's enough to win the game. So I'll spend 2 time on a search, and that's it. Because even if you fail a search, even if I get this search and then I fail, I can still take the top item card. I'll just have to increase the horror by 2 and lose 2 time. So if I take 1 search, I am guaranteed to get that axe no matter what happens. So I can spend 2 time on a search. Then I realize that in order to get to Hans, I'll need to move 3 spaces. And 2 walks most likely isn't going to be good enough. So I will spend another 2 time to get a sprint. And so now I have 3 time left, and I will spend 3 time on a distraction. And the reason I'm picking distraction here, because I could spend 2 time on like another sprint, another search, a guard just in case or whatever, right? The reason I'm picking distraction is because it'll help reduce the horror to potentially get us into the green, like I said earlier, right? Like, it's not necessary to get into the green, but it is still good to try to do so. Also, you don't know what tarot card is going to come out on the next turn. So having a distraction to reduce the horror in case it's something that increases horror by 2 on the very first turn, right? You could get the horror all the way up here, and if you didn't grab a distraction, you'd be panicking right now. So grabbing the distraction before you need it can help mitigate a random spike in horror just by having it in your hand, just in case. I like having a distraction in my hand in the same way people like having a guard in hand just in case the killer comes and attacks them, right? I view distraction like a guard, but for the horror level. And so now I have these, all these cards in my hand, and so now I can play Search, and I can roll the dice, and I'll get a miss and a convert, right? And so then, well, I don't need focus, so I can discard focus and a close call, right? So discard focus and a close call. We search, we lose 1 time, and then we get the axe. And then I can play distraction, right? Because I want to gain some time, but if I play a distraction and I roll a success, maybe 2, I can gain time and reduce the horror level. So we'll roll the dice, and we get a success and a miss. That's great. So we reduce the horror level and then gain 1 time, so we're back at 6 time. And then I could use a sprint and a walk to go over to Hans now, but again, I want to exercise that thing I told you earlier where I don't have to go over there right now. In fact, it is actively detrimental to go over there because I don't have my other, like, all my attacks in my hand yet. It is pointless to go over there on this turn because I don't even have the means to actually win the game yet. So instead, with this 6 time, I will just spend all 6 time to grab a critical blow. And then I'll get all my free cards back. So now I'm sitting here with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Again, I did a lot of stuff on that second turn, and I still have 8 cards in my hand for the next turn. And so then distraction goes back, search, close call, focus. And so now I have an axe, and then I have weak attack and critical blow in my hand. And so already I have the ability on turn, what is this, 3? Because skip turn 1, turn 2, I use the search. Yeah, so turn 3, I already have the ability to deal 3 plus 5. I have the ability to deal 8 damage to Hans right now. And in fact, I will. So again, like, obviously I would be drawing tarot cards and Hans would be potentially moving or like increasing horror level a little bit. But just assuming that he's not like moving at all, right? In fact, he probably would have just moved like up here on the first turn, maybe moved down here and killed one of these victims on the second turn, right? Let's just say something like that. And then let's say the horror went up by 1. Something like that. A fairly like reasonable thing to happen, and then this victim would panic somewhere. Let's just say they panic up here, right? Totally fine. So now, on this turn, I can play sprint. So I'd roll the dice. We get a double convert. So I'll discard focus and short rest. So we'll lose 1 time, and then we'll go 2 spaces and go into Hans' space. And then I'll play weak attack first, because if I can just roll 1 success, that's all I need. So weak attack, we get a success. I roll a convert, but converting a weak attack, all it does is just make you not take damage. I don't need to worry about that, so I would just take 1 damage and deal 3 damage to Hans, right? Then I will play critical blow, roll the dice, and we get a miss and a convert. That's unfortunate. I'll try to close call to reroll this miss into something better. And we just get another miss. Okay, so that sucks. I can discard 2 cards to make it a normal success, which will deal 4 damage and reduce the horror level by 1. So 4 damage, reduce the horror level by 1. And then I can spend 1 time on close call and 4 time on retaliate. Okay, and then all those would go away. And then Hans would go and attack, and I would play retaliate, rolling 2 dice. And then I get a double miss, which would actually be horrible here, but you get the idea, right? So like, even though this roll went bad for us, like Final Girl in the end is still a game about RNG. You can't, I have an 80% win rate. I don't have 100% win rate because luck is still a factor, right? Things like this can still happen. But if I did roll a success and a convert, let's say, I could discard these 2 cards and then ignore all damage and then deal 4 damage back, and then Hans would be at 1 HP. And if I had been able to get a double success on the critical blow, then Hans would actually be dead right now, and it's like turn 4 or 5. So that's just a demonstration of like, yes, you can like move and focus on saving victims and reducing the horror level and like all that sort of thing. But if you just identify a win condition very early on, you can take that win condition and then just like again just snowball that advantage into something that is just so insurmountable that the killer will never be able to come back from it. Um, and even in the event that I completely flubbed this retaliate roll, right? Like Hans's bloodlust is so low that I'd only be taking 2 damage. Like you only take 2 damage and then you still have a chance to survive to the next turn where you can buy your guards or any attacks you didn't get earlier, like the Furious Strike or whatever, right? But yeah, so finding a win condition is like the next biggest. So you have the hand management with don't overplay your cards, like discard your cards that you're not going to use for time, so that way you can make your next turn better and not necessarily just play all the cards in your hand just because you can, right? Think about what your next turn is going to look like, not just this turn. And then identify win conditions, grab a weapon if you see it. But I also want to talk about what happens when you don't actually see a win condition on the first turn, right? So let's backpedal a little bit and let me reset all this stuff back to turn 1. So we're back to the first turn, except this time, instead of the axe, we're going to have the lucky dice item at the dock instead. So now you're looking at your first turn and you're looking at the starting items and you see a first aid kit, lucky dice, and mysterious pills. None of those items are going to help you win the game. Like first aid kit will help you prevent you from dying. Lucky dice might help you mitigate some of the bad luck. Mysterious pills will either heal you or reduce the horror level. Like all of those are nice effects to have, but none of those items are going to win the game, right? None of these are win conditions like I just talked about. And so if the items aren't going to sort of give you your win condition, what else can give you your win condition? Well, none of these are weapons that are going to help me just like immediately win the game. However, I am playing as Lori. And Lori, if I can unlock her ultimate, whenever you're in the same space as an enemy and inflict damage, do an additional damage. So Lori's ultimate basically is a 1 damage weapon. So if I can save 6 victims, then that can be my new win condition, right? And so now, instead of discarding 3 cards to gain 3 time on the first turn and getting like a search, 2 sprints, and 2 close calls and distraction, well, now we don't need the search because the cards that we're searching for aren't as good, right? And so instead, we could spend 2 time on 2 close calls, obviously, but then we can spend 4 time on 2 sprints and then 3 time on a distraction. And so what this is going to do, we still have the same amount of cards in hand, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, so still 8 cards. But now we have 2 sprints in our hand instead of a sprint and a search because our win condition has changed. We don't need to search the dock immediately anymore because the item that's in the dock isn't going to immediately propel us to victory. Instead, we want to save as many victims as quickly as possible in order to get our ultimate online, so that way we can go and attack Hans and have it be a lot easier than if we didn't have our ultimate online, right? So you could play sprints and then you could like move up here. And so then the next course of action would be to identify the most efficient way to acquire your win condition, because this game is all about like turn efficiency, right? Because you have 10 turns before the finale flips, and then usually the finale will put you on some kind of clock. The killer will have 2 attacks, which is impossible to survive forever, usually. Or you'll be going against like the Poltergeist, who literally puts you on like a 3-turn clock with 3 tarot cards or whatever. And so here you have these 2 victims clumped up over here. And so it might be tempting, since you're right here, to go like over here and then back to this exit to save these victims and then go up here. But if you look up here, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 victims already up here that are just on the way to this exit. You don't need to save these 2 victims down here. Like, yes, you're closer to these victims and this exit like immediately, but you have to go up here to save these victims regardless anyway. So you can just leave these victims down here and just go up here and save these ones and just never worry about these. And in fact, you might get lucky, and Hans, the first tarot card, might be like, have him to teleport to the furthest target. And so he could like move over here and like somehow maybe end up making his way over here and killing these victims somehow. Meanwhile, you're up here saving these victims while he's like kind of getting distracted by these victims that you left behind. Obviously, that might not be realistic with this exact setup, but like if Hans was over, if he was already over here, like it might be tempting to save these victims before Hans can get to them. But in reality, it might be better to leave them there and then go up here and save all these victims while he's distracted, just killing these 2 victims while you save everyone else, right? So just identifying your win conditions and then identifying how to achieve that win condition in as few turns as possible is what is going to allow you to get better at this game and potentially have an 80% win rate. So yeah, let me just double check. Oh, so those were like the really, really big tips that I wanted to go over. But now I want to go over some of the kind of smaller tips that could kind of just help you if you already knew that big stuff and like are still struggling a little bit. This like minor stuff could maybe help you tweak some of your gameplay a little bit and show you that you might have been making mistakes that you hadn't fully realized. So a big one is when it comes to dice, like Final Girl is about rolling dice, right? The game inherently has luck, and sometimes that luck is not going to go into your favor. You are going to fail dice rolls eventually, unless you're like a god and have all the luck in the world and you just only roll 6s for your entire life. You're going to miss eventually, right? And so another big tip that I have is don't be afraid to fail. And what I mean by that is like if you play a walk and then you roll something like this, a double convert, it might not be worth it to discard 2 cards to make that a success. Just because, as an example, right? Like, when you succeed in a walk, you lose 1 time and move 1 space. If you fail a walk, you get to move 1 space, you still lose 1 health. Or sorry, you still move 1 space, you lose 1 health and lose 2 time. And so the only thing that's really changing is you're losing 1 health and 1 extra time when you fail, but you still get to move the same amount. So failing a walk is totally fine. I mean, as long as you're not at 1 HP, right? But failing a walk is totally fine. And so if you miss on a walk, it might not be worth it to try to force it to be a success. Like, don't waste your close calls or discard cards willy-nilly just to force this walk to be a success. Let it fail. Wait to discard cards to convert something into a success that matters way more. Like, for example, a retaliate. If a retaliate fails, you get nothing. You get absolutely nothing if a retaliate fails. Or like most of your attacks, like Furious Strike, you just lose health and increase horror by 1, but you don't deal any damage. So there are some cards where failing is really brutal. And so you want to pick and choose, like, is this okay to fail? And so if you roll on a walk and you don't roll a success, leave it be. Don't bother trying to convert it. Don't use a close call. Like, just leave it be and try again, like, on the next one. Or another brilliant example is that search that I showed you, right? Like, search is another card where it can be okay to fail. Sure, it really sucks to fail on a search, but you can still increase the horror by 2, lose 2 time, and then take the top item card regardless. Yeah, sure, it sucks to increase the horror by 2, but if you don't do that, you're still increasing it by 1 anyway and losing the same amount of time. So you might as well just increase the horror by 1 additional amount just to get the item card that you were trying to search for anyway. So search is also another card where it's totally okay to fail. Or even, I've done this multiple times, I use distraction a lot because it's just a card where you reduce the horror and then gain 1 time on a single success. But I don't succeed on distraction every time. Sometimes I whiff. But even if you whiff on a distraction, you still get to reduce the horror in exchange for losing 4 time. And don't get me wrong, losing 4 time is a ton, but at least you're still reducing the horror level and advancing the game state, right? So that's like the next big tip, is just while trying to execute your win condition, you may get unlucky, you may still fail some of your rolls, but if you identify when it's okay to fail some of those rolls, you're not going to have to feel obligated to use your close calls every single time, or you're not going to feel obligated to turn every single convert into a success by discarding 2 cards. And so that'll help, again, keep your the cards in your hand, your card count high, so that way you can have 8 to 10 cards in your hand at the end of each turn, right? Whereas if you're discarding cards every single time you don't roll a success, you might just run out of cards eventually. I've had a lot of games where I can't seem to roll a natural success for the rest of my life, or I can't seem to roll a natural success for the life of me, but because I managed, like, when I did and didn't turn some of those conversions into successes, I was still able to turn that really bad luck into a win. You don't have to roll a success every single time, and in fact, you don't even have to roll a success most of the time. You only really need to roll successes when you're rolling for attacks or defenses. Other than that, you're pretty okay to fail some stuff. And on that note, health is also a resource, right? Because when you fail a walk, you have to lose 1 health. And don't be afraid of losing that health, because you can always play short rest to get it back. Like, you have a free card that can be used to heal you, that you will get back basically every turn. So it is totally okay to fail a walk, lose a health, and then potentially get it back with short rest later. Or when you use weak attack, even if you succeed, you still have to lose 1 health. And it'll be totally okay to, like, lose that health and, again, just use short rest and then heal it back later. Or if you can't seem to roll a success for the life of you and you just keep, like, losing health to, like, walks or weak attack or whatever, or maybe the killer, like, randomly attacked you when you weren't expecting it and dealt a small chunk of damage off of you, then you can be in adrenaline range and get an extra die to roll, and you can, while you're in adrenaline level, you can play stuff like distraction to reduce the horror level. You can use focuses and hope to get a double success with your extra die to get extra time. And then and then after you play your full turn, then you play short rest to heal some of that health back, and then you lose the die. If you ever are forced to go down into adrenaline range because you just keep bleeding out your health, use the adrenaline die to your advantage first before eventually healing out of it. And I would recommend healing out of adrenaline range at some point. Because yes, the extra die is nice, and it sucks to play a card that literally makes you lose a die by healing, but that extra die doesn't matter if you play a walk and then you fail. Or even more brutally, if you play a sprint, you roll those 3 dice and they all come up misses. Sprint forces you to take damage. Whether you move or not, you are forced to lose health. And if you're only at 1 health because you're relying on that adrenaline die, you're still gonna die. Major takeaway from this video, from all these tips and tricks, right? Tip number 1, manage your hand size effectively. Discard cards to gain time. Like, don't overplay. Discard cards to gain time, so that way you have more cards on future turns that you can then play and discard to continue to have a large hand size every single turn for the rest of the game. And then big tip number 2, identify your win conditions and then identify the most efficient path to achieve that win condition. So search, if you're already on a search spot that has a strong weapon in it, you just grab a search and then immediately go to the killer, ignore the other victims, don't try to like get more searching if it's not really necessary. Or if your win condition is your ultimate, grab a bunch of sprints immediately and just try to move and save as many victims in the most efficient way possible, while ignoring the victims that are like really far out of the way that you might not necessarily need to save. And then obviously tip number 3, be okay to fail some of your rolls. Be okay to get a miss, take a little bit of damage. Health is a resource, right? Take a little bit of damage, heal it off later, increase your horror a little bit, just reduce it later through focuses or distraction, most likely distraction if you're me. Or even your attacks. Fear Strike and Critical Blow will also reduce horror for you. Don't forget that. And I think one final send-off for this video, if you, let's say you're playing as the Night of the Pigs scenario, right? So if you guys are familiar with the scenarios in this game, there is a very infamous scenario called Night of the Pig. And in that scenario, it forces the hardest combination of Finale and Dark Power for Hans. It forces the worst starting event on you, and then it removes every single weapon from the item pool. And you might be wondering how, so the worst starting event in the game, by the way, for Camp Happy Trails at least, is Stubborn Kids, where 1 less victim will follow you. So in order to, so something like that can be really hard to win, because it seems like on the face of it, a lot of your immediate win conditions have been removed. Like there are no weapons in any of the item decks. So that whole thing I said about finding a weapon, gaining a weapon, well, that's just not an option anymore, right? But that's also kind of a blessing, because it means you don't have to, you're not going to aimlessly look through the item decks to try to find a weapon, because you already know that they're not there, right? And so, but in that scenario, you're still playing as Lori. And even though, yes, you have the Stubborn Kids event, 1 less victim will follow you, you can still go around and try to save 6 victims. You can still go around and try to save 6 victims, so that way you can activate this ultimate ability, which will give you that extra damage as if you had a weapon, right? Or there are still some items that are incredibly strong that can still occupy the same sort of realm of win condition, even if they're not a weapon, right? So I want to kind of, even if you're doing the Night of the Pig scenario where it seems like there's no immediate face-up weapons, there you have a terrible starting event, there's still a win condition. Like your ultimate, even though it's harder to get because of the event, it's still a win condition. It's still something you can work toward and should work toward. Or, in the case of the Night of the Pig scenario, you have pepper spray, fireworks, and the bear trap. So, if I'm not mistaken, all 3 of these are available during the Night of the Pig scenario, and none of them are weapons. So, pepper spray, if the killer is in your space, you may discard this to immediately end the killer phase. Ignore their remaining movement, attacks, and any other effects. So, what this can do is it kind of simulates having the axe without actually having the axe. So what I mean by that is I showed you how when you don't have the axe, if you use all of your attacks and retaliate, you can do 8 damage, right? So you can do 8 damage, and then if you have the axe, you do 16 damage. So the axe effectively doubles your damage. Well, pepper spray can kind of do the same thing, because you can use all of your attacks, then use pepper spray to, because in order to attack the killer, you're going to be in the killer's space, so you can use all of your attacks, then the start of the killer phase happens, you can immediately use pepper spray, end the killer phase before basically anything happens, and then obviously you wouldn't be able to buy the same attacks you just used, but you could, it'll buy you a turn to like run away, then buy your cards again, and then use all those attacks to deal 8 damage again. So the pepper spray, even though it doesn't do any extra damage like the axe does, it can end the killer's turn and buy you enough time to grab your attacks again to effectively deal double the damage without the killer doing much in the meantime, right? So the pepper spray is also still a potential win condition, even though it's not an actual weapon. Same thing with the bear trap. You can spend 2 time to place the bear trap token in your space, discard this card. If the killer enters the space with the bear trap, discard the token and immediately end the killer phase. The killer receives 2 damage. So this is also available in the Night of the Pig scenario, and it's not a weapon, but it deals damage and ends the killer's turn. So it does what pepper spray does, while also dealing damage. And so again, it's just another way to just end the killer's turn, buy yourself some time to get your attacks back after you use them, while still dealing damage. And then fireworks, once again, basically the same thing. Spend 2 time, place the fireworks in a space, and then whenever the killer must choose a target, they will choose the fireworks instead. Discard the fireworks token when the killer enters the space where it is located. So the fireworks, again, you just place it somewhere, and then the killer will have to go to the space with the fireworks. And if you just place it on a space without victims and where you're not standing, it will effectively skip the killer's turn, right? And so these are all options that you can search for in the item deck that are not weapons that will be another pseudo win condition, even if you don't like find any weapons or any other obvious win conditions, right? And so that, I think, is a good place to conclude this sort of tips and tricks video for Final Girl, right? Like, just hand management, identify win conditions, and don't be afraid to fail some dice rolls. So that will help you with any killer, any location, and any final girl you're using. No matter the matchup, no matter what's happening, if you kind of think about those three things, you should be set up well enough to have a much higher win rate than you did previously. So thank you all so much for watching. I know that was a really long winded video. I didn't have a script, but I hope it all at least made sense, and I will see you all in the next video.